Hi everyone, Mike here from Watch It Paint It. In this video I'll be painting some of the new Marines from Age of Darkness, which was kindly sent to Ben and I from Games Workshop. In this video I wanted to paint a couple Marines yellow with an airbrush, and then compare that to the new Imperial Fist contrast paint that everyone's been raving about. So I'll show you these two ways to paint yellow, and then talk about the pros and cons of each at the end. So I'm going to start off with the airbrush models. I've already primed these ones in black, and now I'm going to base coat them completely with a layer of a rust color. This is 1 part cypress brown and 2 parts lava orange. I'm covering the entire model with this, making sure that the armor has a good solid covering of it. You never want to put yellow on top of black or gray, otherwise it's going to come out looking greenish, and you'll need dozens of layers to get that to go away. After I'm happy with that layer, I'm mixing some light bone or an ivory color into the rust color until I get a light tan. You don't need to use these exact colors, of course. Any orange, brown, and tan color will work for this, but you do want to make sure the highlight color on top is fairly light for the yellow to go over. This is just a zenithal prime, but using browns instead of using shades of gray. For the yellow color, I'll be using Cygnus Yellow from P3. It was the closest yellow I had to what I thought Imperial Fist should look like. I'm adding the thinner first, and then I'm going to mix this fairly thin, about 50-50 thinner and yellow paint. I want this pretty much a glaze, and I'm going to put it over the entire model. Yellow over browns is how I always paint yellow, but just for fun, I decided to try yellow over a pink base coat, mostly because I've heard that gives a fantastic yellow color with intense shadows. Well, here are my two attempts, and they look pretty horrible in my opinion, either super orange looking or a baby poop brown. I'm sure that there's a perfect way to get a nice color of yellow over pink, but it's just so finicky and hard to do, there's really no point in using this method, in my opinion. After the first coat has sit for a while, you may need to add a second or third coat from above to get a good intense yellow. So here's how they're looking so far, and you can see there's some fairly good shadow on the lower half. Next I'm just going to add a few other colors to finish this model off. I like mixing black speed paint or contrast paint with a silver color just to help it flow. And this is the hard part about painting yellow this way, trying not to get a different color paint on it. If you do get a different color on the yellow, you'll have to find or mix a color that matches that mistake to do any touch-ups, or paint that spot to look like battle damage. I did make a couple mistakes, but I was able to hide them using GW's Averland Sunset. Okay, before I go any further, I want to paint the last model with contrast paint up to this point. Completely opposite from the airbrush method, I'll be priming this model with white paint. Also, rather than paint the metallics last, I'm going to paint those first. This way if I make a mistake, I can touch it up with white paint before I add the yellow contrast paint. So far, the contrast method is more relaxed. I know that mistakes are going to be easy to fix at this point, and if I get yellow on the silver, no biggie, that's also easy to fix. Okay, the moment of truth. This is the first time I've used this new yellow, and my first impression is, oh baby. Look how smooth this is going on with just one thin coat. This is just fun to use. A single intense yellow pigment that has crazy coverage. I'm not using the new White Scar spray primer. This is the old Corax white stuff. I did have some White Scar coming my way, but it never made it across the US border into Canada. I'm sure some Canadian or US customs agent is home right now painting their Warhammer army with it. Regardless, the Corax White is working just fine. Even though it is slightly tinted gray, I'm still getting a very intense yellow from the Imperial Fist. Now I've done a couple extra steps off camera. First I sprayed the first two models with a gloss varnish, and then I applied some water transfers. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the contrast painted model. I'll link a video at the end of this one where Ben shows how he and I apply transfers if you're interested. Next I want to grime these guys up a bit with a dark wash and add a bit of shadow. One thing about the Imperial Fist Yellow is that it gives an even smooth coverage, but it doesn't create a lot of contrast. The wash I'm using is going to be a 50-50 mix of Fireslayer Flesh and contrast medium. This takes me back to using Army Painter Quick Shade. If you've ever used that, this is pretty much the same. Start by completely covering the entire model. Next I put 4 drops of contrast medium onto a wet palette, and I'm going to use that to help me wash off the armor, while pushing the brown wash into recesses and in between the armor plates. By using medium, you're keeping the paint from drying out by reactivating it, and you could use water, but I don't want to do that because I don't want the paint to get too runny. That being said, you still only have about 4 or 5 minutes to clean the model before the wash starts to get sticky and unworkable. So when I finished, the armor is mostly cleaned off, and the panel lines and other grooves all have nice dark shadows, as well as some metal studs. There's paint around the base of each one, making them pop. I'll set that aside to dry, and then do the same thing to the other two models. This video is just to experiment with different ways of painting yellow, so off camera I added black contrast paint over the guns and the joints of the armor, and then I painted the eyes red. Here are the models after a quick basing and a matte varnish. The first two are the airbrushed models, so what are the pros and cons of each method? Well, for the airbrush, you are going to get better shadows and color contrast. The downside is you will have to use several colors to get this effect, and if you make mistakes with the airbrush, they're a lot harder to fix than if you're using a brush-on paint. For the contrast paint method, it is much easier to fix mistakes, especially if you're putting the colors on in a certain order, and the contrast paint is very easy to use. The downside is that the shadows aren't as pronounced and the paint job can look a bit flat if you're only using one contrast paint color. So, what would I do differently if I wanted to paint the best yellow possible? Not necessarily the easiest, but the best. I think I'd use the exact same steps with the airbrush, but instead of Cygnus yellow, I would just put Imperial Fist yellow in the airbrush as the final color. The new Imperial Fist is super vibrant, so I think it would do a better job. Sorry Cygnus yellow, but your services are no longer required. So that's it for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments, which method you think is best, or tell me your best method for painting yellow. I'd love to hear it. And thanks for watching.